The silence was a physical thing. It had weight, pressing down on Jack Cutter's shoulders, filling the derelict farmhouse with the dust of dead memories. For 3 weeks, the only sounds had been the creak of floorboards under his boots and the glug of whiskey pouring into a glass. His own voice was a ghost he'd long since banished. Words were for people with something to say, for men who hadn't watched their world burn to ash in the Afghan sun. He was a ghost himself, haunting the shell of a life he was supposed to reclaim. The farm had been his grandfather's, a place of supposed peace, but the quiet here was different from the silence of the mountains. That silence had been alive, pregnant with threat. This quiet was just empty, a tomb. His body was a roadmap of ruin. A web of scars pulled tight across his left side, a permanent reminder of the IED that had stolen his team, his career, his soul. Bravo team. Their faces swam in the amber liquid of his glass. Harris, with his stupid jokes. Martinez, who was getting married. Young Corporal Davies, barely 20. Ghosts, all of them. And he, Ghost Lead, was the one who had walked out of the fire. The guilt was a physical shard of shrapnel lodged deep behind his ribs, twisting with every breath. The November wind screamed like a banshee, rattling the window frames. It was a sound he understood, a sound of pure, mindless grief. He stood, the worn floorboards groaning in protest, and stared at the bare wall where family photos once hung. He'd taken them down. He couldn't stand the sight of the smiling boy who had gone to war, the naive fool who thought honor was a shield. A sudden violent crack echoed through the house as a sheet of corrugated tin roofing ripped free from the barn. The sound was like a distant sniper rifle, a sharp report that made the muscles in his back clench. He didn't flinch. Flinching was for the living. But the relentless percussive banging of the metal against the barn wall was an intrusion, a violation of his carefully curated emptiness. He pulled on his battered work coat, the fabric stiff and cold, and stepped out into the freezing rain. The wind bit at his face, 1,000 tiny needles of ice. The world was a smear of gray and brown, the dead fields stretching out to a dead horizon. He moved toward the barn, his limp more pronounced in the cold, his mind a static-filled void. Fix the roof, restore the silence. That was the mission. He was halfway across the muddy yard when he heard it. It was not the wind. It was not the banging tin. It was a whimper. Low, ragged, and so full of pain it cut through the whiskey-soaked cotton that insulated his heart. The sound snagged on something deep inside him, a wire he thought had been severed long ago. He stopped, head cocked, listening past the storm's fury. There it was again, weaker this time, almost lost in a gust of wind. He changed course, his boots sinking into the sodden earth, moving toward the collapsed section of an old outbuilding near the property line. The structure was a skeleton of rotting timbers and rusted metal, a graveyard of forgotten tools and failed ambitions. The sound was coming from inside the wreckage. He pulled away a large piece of splintered wood, the rain plastering his hair to his skull, and then he saw it, a German shepherd wedged between a fallen beam and a pile of debris. Its fur was matted with mud and blood. It was impossibly thin, its ribs a stark cage beneath its wet hide. One of its hind legs was trapped, twisted at an unnatural angle. The dog lifted its head. A low growl rumbled in its chest, a pathetic attempt at a threat from a creature on the verge of collapse. But it was the eyes that held Jack captive. They were dark, intelligent, and filled with a pain so profound, so familiar. It was like looking into a mirror. He saw the same haunted landscape he saw in his own reflection every morning. The animal was broken, just like him. The dog's growl was a fragile thing, a shield of sound against a world that had offered nothing but cruelty. Jack didn't move. He crouched, letting the icy rain soak through his jeans, making himself smaller, less of a threat. His training, buried under layers of trauma and alcohol, flickered to life. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Stay calm, Project Calm. Easy, he rasped. The word felt alien in his throat, a dry crackle of dead leaves. It was the first word he had spoken to another living being in 22 days. It cost him something to say it. The dog's ears twitched. The growling subsided, replaced by a low, continuous whine of agony. It was watching him, assessing him with an unnerving intensity. Jack saw the intelligence there, the discipline beneath the pain. This was not just some stray. He began to move, slowly, deliberately, clearing the smaller pieces of debris around the trapped leg. He expected a snap, a lunge. Instead, the dog just watched, its breathing shallow and rapid. With every piece of wreckage he moved, he spoke. The words were simple, functional, almost there. Hold on. Each one was a small act of resurrection, pulling his own voice from the grave. He finally reached the heavy beam, pinning the animal's leg. It was too heavy to lift from his current angle. He'd have to shift it, pry it up just enough for the dog to pull free. He found a length of rusted iron pipe to use as a lever. As he positioned it, he saw what the dog had been guarding. Tucked beneath its body was a small, tattered piece of fabric, a fragment of a desert camo boonie hat. The sight sent a jolt through him, a phantom pain that had nothing to do with his own scars. A memory, sharp and unwelcome, of Harris, who had lost his favorite boonie hat on their last patrol. He pushed the memory down, focusing on the task. Okay, boy, this is gonna hurt, he murmured. He put his weight on the pipe. The beam groaned, lifting an inch. The dog yelped, a sharp cry of pain, and instinctively, its head whipped around. Teeth clamped down on Jack's forearm. He didn't pull away. He didn't curse. He held his position, the muscles in his arm and back screaming in protest, the dog's teeth grinding against the bone. He looked into its eyes and held its gaze. "I know," he grunted, the words tight with strain. "I've got you." Slowly, as if recognizing the absence of aggression, the dog released its grip. It whined, licking the puncture wounds it had just made. The beam was high enough. With a final surge of effort, the dog scrambled backward, pulling its mangled leg free. Jack let the beam crash back down, his body trembling with exertion. He heard a truck engine before he saw the headlights cut through the rain. A beat-up Ford rattled to a stop at the edge of his property. A large, slovenly man climbed out, a length of rebar clutched in one hand. The man's face was a mask of petty cruelty. "There you are, you worthless mutt," the man snarled, his voice carrying over the wind. He started toward them. "Cost me $200 tonight. You're gonna pay for that." The German Shepherd flattened itself to the ground, a deep, menacing growl now rumbling from its chest. This was different. This was not fear. This was hate. Jack rose slowly to his full height, placing himself between the man and the dog. He said nothing. He just stood there, a silent, scarred sentinel in the driving rain. "That's my dog." "Get out of the way, old man," the man, Jed, spat. He brandished the rebar. Jack didn't move. He let the man see his face, let him see the dead calm in his eyes. It was a look forged in the kill or be killed crucible of close-quarters combat. It was the look of a man who had nothing left to lose and understood violence on an elemental level. He had faced down men with RPGs and suicide vests. This slob with a piece of iron was nothing. A gnat. Jed took another step, then hesitated. He saw it. He saw the abyss staring back at him from Jack's eyes. He saw the coiled stillness of a predator. His bravado crumbled into dust. "Fine. Keep the stupid dog?" "He's broken anyway," Jed muttered, backing away. He scrambled back into his truck, shot Jack one last hateful glare, and sped off, tires spinning in the mud. He was lying. Jack knew it. The fear in Jed's eyes was that of a subordinate who had failed a dangerous master. This wasn't over. Jack turned back to the dog. It was watching him, its body tense. He knelt, ignoring the bite on his arm, and extended a hand, palm down. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's get you out of the rain." The dog hesitated for a long moment, then took a limping step forward and licked his hand. Trust, earned in a moment of shared pain and quiet defiance. Jack gently scooped the animal into his arms. It was shockingly light. He carried it back to the farmhouse, leaving the banging tin roof for another day. The silence he had fought so hard to maintain was broken, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't mind. Inside, the warmth of the house was a stark contrast to the storm outside. Jack laid the dog on a thick wool blanket near the fireplace, the only source of heat in the drafty home. The dog collapsed with a sigh, its body trembling from cold and exhaustion. Jack built up the fire, the crackle of the logs a comforting sound in the oppressive quiet. He worked with an efficiency he hadn't felt in years. He brought out his old field medic kit, the contents meticulously maintained from a habit he couldn't break. He cleaned the dog's wounds, his hands steady. The leg was bad, likely broken, but the cuts and scrapes were manageable. The dog watched his every move, but made no protest, as if it understood. As he worked on its neck, gently cleaning a patch of matted fur, his fingers found a small, hard lump beneath the skin. It was too regular, too defined to be a cyst or a tumor. It felt manufactured. Then, as he cleaned its ear, he saw it, faint but unmistakable. A series of letters and numbers tattooed onto the inner flap. It was a military ID. The discovery landed like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a stray. This was a soldier, a fellow veteran, abandoned and left to die. A righteous anger, hot and clean, burned through the fog of his apathy. It was an emotion so foreign he barely recognized it. He finished his work, bandaging the leg as best he could. He set out a bowl of water, which the dog drank greedily, and then some leftover stew, which it devoured in seconds. Finally, its belly full and its wounds tended, the animal crawled closer to the fire, laid its head on its paws, and slept. Jack sat in his armchair, the whiskey bottle forgotten on the table, and just watched it breathe. The next morning, the storm had passed. The dog's leg was swollen, and it couldn't put any weight on it. Jack knew it needed a real doctor. He found the number for the only veterinarian in the small town of Harmony Creek, a Dr. Eris Thorne. He carried the dog to his old pickup truck, the engine complaining before turning over. The dog sat in the passenger seat, occasionally leaning its head against Jack's arm. The small gesture of trust felt monumental. The clinic was small, clean, and smelled of bleach and animal fear. Dr. Thorne was a woman in her late 30s with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She took in Jack's scarred face, his unkempt appearance, and the carefully bundled dog in his arms with a professional, cautious neutrality. "What have we got here?" she asked, her voice calm and even. "Found him last night, legs broken. Got a military tattoo in his ear," Jack said, the words still feeling rusty. Her eyebrows shot up at the mention of the tattoo. She led him to an examination room. "Let's have a look." Her hands were gentle and sure as she examined the dog. She handled him with a respect that eased some of the tension in Jack's shoulders. He's severely malnourished and dehydrated. This leg is a clean break of the tibia. Will require surgery. And you're right. She pointed to the tattoo. That's a MWD identification number. She looked at Jack. Where did you say you found him? Trapped in some wreckage on my property. A man came by, said the dog was his, tried to take him. Did you get his name? No, but he'll be back. It wasn't a guess. It was a certainty. Eris nodded, her expression growing serious. I'm going to run a scan for a microchip. She passed a handheld scanner over the dog's neck. It beeped. Standard chip here. Wait. She moved the scanner again. There's something else. Deeper. Shielded. Whatever it is, it's not standard. She looked from the scanner to Jack. This dog is carrying something a lot more important than an ID tag. She turned to her computer. Let's see what we can find with this tattoo number. She typed for a few moments, her brow furrowed in concentration. The silence in the room stretched thin. Jack could feel his pulse quicken. The dog, as if sensing his anxiety, nudged his hand with its nose. Suddenly, Eris leaned back from the screen, her face pale. Oh my God, she whispered. What is it? Jack demanded, his voice low. She turned the monitor toward him. On the screen was a military service record. A photo of the same German shepherd, healthy and proud, sitting next to a smiling young sailor. Molded K9 unit, Kaiser, handler. Petty Officer Leo Ramirez, call sign Finch, state, 14 March, location Helmand Province, Afghanistan. Jack's blood ran cold. He knew that province. He knew those dates. The name Ramirez tickled a distant memory. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. That's impossible, Eris said, her voice trembling slightly. The date of death listed here is 6 months after the official report said your unit was. She trailed, off, realizing what she was saying. The official story was that Bravo team had been hit by a massive sophisticated IED, no survivors. A tragic, but clean loss. But the file in front of them suggested something else. It suggested a lie. Kaiser and his handler were supposedly killed in an ambush half a year after my team was wiped out, Jack said, thinking aloud. So what is he doing here, in a ditch on my farm, with a second, hidden chip in his neck? The question hung in the sterile air of the clinic, heavy and dangerous. This dog wasn't just a veteran. He was a witness, a loose end. And the people who had tried to bury him were still out there. Jed wasn't just a bully. He was a spotter, a low-level cog in a much larger, more lethal machine. And now, that machine knew where to find its missing piece. Eris looked at him, her initial caution replaced by a dawning sense of shared danger. What are you going to do? I'm taking him home, Jack said, his voice hard as iron. And I'm going to be ready when they come for him. The farmhouse was no longer a tomb, it was a fortress. As Eris prepped Kaiser for surgery to set his leg, Jack went home and transformed. The ghost receded, and the soldier emerged. He moved with a cold, fluid purpose, years of training taking over. He checked sightlines, reinforced doors, created fallback positions. He cleaned and oiled the only 2 firearms he owned, his service pistol and a hunting rifle. They felt familiar and solid in his hands, extensions of his will. He worked through the night, his mind a razor-sharp instrument of tactical analysis. Every creak of the old house was a potential footstep, every shadow a possible threat. He was no longer waiting for death. He was preparing to deliver it. He was protecting his own. The dog, this broken soldier named Kaiser, was his now. He was part of Jack's new 2-man fire team. Eris called late that night. The surgery went well. He's in recovery. But Jack? I did some more digging. Leo Ramirez's family lives 2 counties over. His father is a retired Marine. She paused. And Finch? Leo Ramirez. He was part of the QRF dispatched to your location on the day of the attack. The Quick Reaction Force. The unit that was supposed to save them. The official report said they were pinned down by heavy fire and arrived too late. Another lie? Keep Kaiser there tonight, Jack ordered, his voice a low command. Barricade the door to the recovery room. Don't open it for anyone but me. Jack, maybe you should call the police. They're not equipped for what's coming, he said, and hung up. He knew the enemy. They weren't common criminals. They were professionals. And you don't fight professionals with a 911 call. He sat in the dark, the rifle across his lap, and waited. The silence was back, but it was different now. It was alive, humming with anticipation. It was the silence before the storm. It came just before dawn, the darkest hour. Not a vehicle, not a sound, just a flicker of movement in the periphery. 2 figures, moving with disciplined stealth, clad in black tactical gear. They didn't approach the front door. They flanked the house, one moving to the rear, one to the side window. Amateurs would have hit the front. These men were pros. Jack was already in position, melting into the deep shadows of the living room. His heart was a slow, steady drum. The fear was gone, burned away by the cold fire of purpose. A muffled crack, and the side window shattered inwards. The first man slithered through, a suppressed pistol leading the way. He moved with the fluid grace of a hunter. Jack let him come. He let him clear the first corner, let him step into the center of the room, a perfect silhouette against the slightly less dark window. Jack fired the rifle once. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. The man dropped without a sound, a puppet with its strings cut. The second man at the back door didn't hesitate. He breached it with a single, powerful kick, rolling inside and coming up firing, spraying controlled bursts where he expected Jack to be. But Jack was already moving. He vaulted over the sofa, landing silently, using the noise of the breach to cover his movement. The contractor was good. He tracked the sound, swinging his weapon around. For a split second, they were face to face in the gloom. The man was fast, his pistol coming up. Jack was faster. He lunged, not at the gun, but at the man, driving the butt of his rifle into his throat. The man gagged, stumbling backward. Jack followed through, a brutal, efficient sequence of strikes designed to disable and destroy. It was muscle memory, a violent dance he hadn't performed in years. But his body remembered. He disarmed the man, who now fought with a desperate ferocity, a combat knife appearing in his hand. The blade flashed, slicing Jack's arm. He barely felt it. They crashed against the wall, a whirlwind of desperate lethal force. The man was strong, fueled by adrenaline. He got a lucky shot in, his fist connecting with Jack's jaw. Stars exploded behind Jack's eyes. He staggered, and the man pressed his advantage, the knife plunging toward Jack's chest. He was a fraction of a second from death, and that's when he called Eris. He needed to get Kaiser. He drove with a controlled urgency, the adrenaline from the fight still singing in his veins. The world looked sharper, the colors more vivid. He was awake. When he arrived at the clinic, Eris met him at the door, her face etched with worry. "Jack, what happened? You're bleeding." "We need to go now," he said, brushing past her. In the recovery room, Kaiser was awake. His bandaged leg was propped up, but his eyes were alert. When he saw Jack, he tried to stand, letting out a soft whine. He could smell the blood and cordite on him. "Easy, boy," Jack said, his voice softer than Eris had ever heard it. He gently lifted the dog. "We've got to move." As they were leaving, a county sheriff's car pulled into the parking lot, lights flashing. A portly, officious-looking deputy stepped out. "Mom, we got a call about a disturbance, and a report of a stolen, dangerous animal matching that description," he said, nodding toward Kaiser. "This dog isn't stolen, and he isn't dangerous," Eris shot back, her fear replaced by defiance. "I have a court order here to seize the animal." "It's evidence in a case," the deputy said, but his eyes kept flicking nervously toward Jack. He had seen the cold look in his eyes, the fresh cut on his arm. This was the next wave of the attack. Not with bullets, but with bureaucracy. A legal trap. Jack knew they were cornered. He couldn't fight the law, not like this. Just as the deputy reached for Kaiser, the air was filled with a sound that Jack knew better than his own heartbeat. The rhythmic, chopping whump 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 of military helicopters. 2 Black Hawks descended from the sky, their downdraft kicking up dust and debris in the parking lot. They landed with practiced ease in the field next to the clinic. Armed military police swarmed out, establishing a perimeter. A man in a crisp Navy uniform, a captain's eagles gleaming on his collar, strode toward them. He was older, with a face carved from granite and eyes that held the weight of command. "Captain Eva," Jack said, a wave of disbelief and relief washing over him. "Ghost lead," Captain Eva replied, his voice a low gravel. "Took you long enough to call." He turned to the stunned deputy. "Sheriff, this is now a matter of national security. My men will take it from here. You are relieved." The deputy, utterly out of his depth, could only stammer and nod. Eva turned back to Jack, his gaze falling on Kaiser. "So this is him. This is MWD Kaiser." He reached down and gently stroked the dog's head. "We've been looking for him for a long time." In the sterile quiet of the vet clinic, with MPs standing guard outside, Captain Eva laid out the whole ugly truth. "The contractors you neutralized worked for a company called Titan Security," Eva began. "They were running an off-the-books smuggling operation in Helmand. Weapons, intel, you name it. Petty Officer Ramirez. Finch and Kaiser stumbled onto it during a patrol." He paused, his eyes locking with Jack's. Finch was a good man, a patriot. He knew he couldn't fight them alone. So he gathered all the evidence he could, shipping manifests, encrypted communications, video files, and loaded it onto a hardened data drive, the device you found in Kaiser's neck. The pieces began to click into place for Jack. The lies, the attack, the desperation to get the dog back. Titan caught on before he could transmit the data, Eva continued, his voice grim. They ambushed him. Finch was mortally wounded, but he bought himself enough time to do one last thing. He implanted the drive in Kaiser and gave him his final command: go home. He knew the dog's training would eventually lead him to a friendly base or get him found. He never counted on Titan capturing him first. Titan had faked the KIA report for both handler and dog, creating a clean narrative while they tortured Kaiser, trying to find the drive they knew he was carrying. But Kaiser, the loyal soldier, had endured. He had escaped, wounded and traumatized, and run until he could run no more, finally collapsing on the edge of the property of the one man who might understand. The final piece of the puzzle was the most painful. There's more, Jack, Eva said, his voice softening. On the day your team was hit, Finch and his QRF unit were less than 5 clicks away. They heard the blast. They were geared up to move, but their convoy was deliberately delayed by Titan contractors, who controlled the checkpoint out of their fob. They cited a non-existent threat, holding the QRF back for 20 critical minutes. 20 minutes, an eternity in a firefight, the difference between life and death. Titan did it to protect their operation. Your patrol had strayed too close to one of their smuggling routes, Eva explained. Finch knew it. The guilt of not reaching you, it ate him alive. It's what drove him to investigate Titan in the first place. In a way, he died trying to get justice for your men. The truth hit Jack with the force of a physical blow. The ghosts of Bravo Team, who he thought had died because of his mistake, his failure, were victims of something far more sinister. And Finch, a man he never knew, had died trying to avenge them. He looked down at Kaiser, who was resting his head on Jack's knee. The dog had endured hell, carrying the legacy of his handler, a burden of truth and justice. He had been sent to find a friendly, and through some twist of fate or providence, he had found Ghost Lead. He had found the man his handler had died trying to save. For the first time since he had woken up in a hospital in Landstuhl, Germany, Jack Cutter wept. Not for himself, but for the men he had lost, for the brave sailor he had never met, and for the loyal dog who had carried the truth through the darkness. It was a storm of grief, washing away years of numb silence, cleaning the wound that had festered in his soul. Kaiser whined softly and licked the tears from his face. 6 months later, the sun shone brightly on the Cutter farm. The derelict shell was gone, replaced by a work in progress. A new roof gleamed on the barn, the fences were mended, and the fields were cleared. It was a place of healing, of slow and steady rebuilding. Jack stood in the tall grass, a throwing dummy in his hand. "Seek," he commanded, his voice strong and clear. Kaiser, his leg now fully healed, bolted across the field. He was no longer the emaciated, terrified creature from the storm. His coat was thick and glossy, his muscles powerful. He moved with the grace and confidence of an elite athlete. He located the dummy, locked on, and waited for the next command. He was a soldier, happy to have a mission, happy to have a commander. Jack smiled. It was a real smile, one that reached his eyes. The haunted look was gone, replaced by a quiet, settled peace. He still had scars, inside and out, but they were no longer gaping wounds. They were a part of him, a part of the story of his survival. Eris came out onto the porch, carrying 2 glasses of iced tea. She had become a fixture at the farm, her steady presence a balm to his once fractured spirit. They had bonded over Kaiser's recovery, 2 people dedicated to healing a broken soldier. "He's looking good," she said, handing Jack a glass. "He's the best there is," Jack replied, his gaze full of pride as he watched Kaiser. The information on the data drive delivered by Captain Eva had dismantled Titan security from the top down. Justice, slow and grinding, had been served. The truth about Bravo Team's final stand had been entered into the official record. Their families finally knew they hadn't died alone. Later that evening, Jack sat on the porch steps, the cool night air settling around him. Kaiser came and laid his big head in Jack's lap, letting out a contented sigh. Jack stroked the dog's ears, his fingers tracing the faint lines of the tattoo that had started it all. He was no longer a ghost. He was a man with a purpose. To care for this land, to honor the memories of the fallen, and to protect the loyal soldier who had refused to leave his side. The silence that now fell over the farm was not one of emptiness. It was a silence of peace, of belonging. He looked down at the magnificent animal resting in his lap, a mirror soul who had pulled him back from the brink. "We're home, buddy," Jack whispered, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer feared. "We're both home."